They're coming.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We will just give it a few more minutes to let everyone trickle in, but I'm so excited to see you this morning. All right, so I am seeing some familiar faces, or I should say familiar names out there since we don't have faces this morning. But it is so good to have you guys with us. We will give it another minute before we fully get started. But just a reminder for those of you who have joined us before, and for those of you who haven't, we are going to be able to get your questions in our chat function or our Q&A function. So if you have a question or a comment throughout the program, feel free to just drop it in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will make sure that we get to answer those at the end. Yeah, and please feel free to also introduce yourself into the chat. I see we have Bobby from the 6th grade has joined us. I am Maggie. I am our manager of museum programs here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. So it's great to meet you, Bobby. So we will give it just like a few more seconds to see if anyone else trickles in, and then we will get started. We're very excited to have you this morning. Hello, James. Hello, Amelia and Declan. 7th and 5th grade, perfect. 6th grade for James. Hi, Izzy. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started since we were just a minute after 10 o'clock. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Maggie. I work at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, and we are so excited to have you here for one of our special Black History Month webinars. So today I'm actually going to turn it over to one of our partners. I am joined here by Trinity Swift, who is the education coordinator at the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, and she is going to be presenting this program that we worked on together. The Virginia Museum of History and Culture and the Black History Museum have come together. We got grant funding, or for those of y'all who don't know what that is, we got a lot of money to take care of the Black History Museum's collections and to digitize them and to make them accessible and to turn them into programs for members of the public. So for you guys. So we worked together to create this program about remarkable Black Virginians and mostly remarkable Black Richmonders to show you guys some of the cool stuff in their collection and how our stories can work together. So I'm going to turn it over to Trinity. She's going to be asking you guys questions. She's going to be asking you guys for observations. Please feel free to put that in the chat, and then we can answer any of your questions at the end also. So I'm going off screen and I'm turning it over to you, Trinity.
Awesome. Thanks, Maggie. And good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to speak to you on today about remarkable Black Virginians. We're going to talk about some of the folks you see here in this oil painted picture, but also a bunch of other incredible Black Virginians whose stories you might not have heard before. They may be some lesser known stories than what you learn about in school. We're going to look at the incredible moments in their lives, as well as how those moments impacted others. So in this picture here, from left to right, you'll see the 5 legendary leaders. That's what the painting was titled. The Jackson Ward legacy. And Jackson Ward is important today because a lot of the historical Black figures that I talk about will have some tie or connection to Jackson Ward, which is a general area in Richmond where our museum is actually located. So on the left, you'll see John Mitchell Jr. To the right of him, you'll see Virginia Randolph. To the right of her, you'll see Giles B. Jackson. To the right in the fancy chair, you'll see Mrs. Rosa Bowser. And in the center, kind of at the forefront with the lipstick, you'll see Dr. Zenobia Gilpin. And so what I'm going to do first today, if my slides will, there we go, is have you make some observations in the chat, okay? I want you to see these collection items. I want you to think about what they represent, and maybe wonder how they played into the historical context of this time period. So on the left, I want you to focus first. When we look at museum objects, they tell stories. So these two stories, or these two objects, are what we're going to start with. So what do you think, as I go to the next slide, conveniently, these two collection items are representative of a person that may be more known in your education, in your history classes, than the later historical figures. But as you can see on the left, it's a gold item, right? At the top, the hands are clasped. I'm sure you got that observation. There's a cross in the center. There's an eye with beams behind it at the top of the rim, right? Let me see what else is in the, yep, good job, Caroline and Sarah, a cross and an eye. Awesome. At the bottom, it says of Saint Luke, which will be important as I continue. And then there's a letter I and a letter O on the outer rim of that circle, right? Let's see, somebody else. Yeah, good job. An I and an O. Awesome observation. Yes, it is. It's the same I as the one on the $1 bill. Great attention to detail. So now I'd love you guys to make some observations about the photograph. So look at the people, look at their facial expressions, look at how they're dressed. And in addition to the people, look at the background. Look at the building, the windows, the words on the windows. So again, we see that St. Luke on the right window, as well as in that gold pin. So I'm going to look at some of your observations. Oh, great job. Yes, someone said it's a bank. Yes, they're outside of a bank. Welcome, Miss Landis's 4th grade class. So these objects, this photo and this pin, the St. Luke's pin, and this photograph of the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank is representative of Maggie Walker. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Maggie Walker. Great observations in the chat. Additionally, this object to the right is a coin bank. So some of you may have a piggy bank or some type of bank that you drop loose change in or your allowance in. So when I was younger, I had a cute little piggy bank that I dropped my coins in, and it had a plug at the bottom where I could let the money out when I wanted to use it. So this is kind of similar, looks a little different. But if you can see at the bottom, there's a slot to insert your coins. Maggie Walker, in the photograph to the left, was born in 1864 and passed in 1943. We use those objects to spark our memory or recollection or prior knowledge about this historical figure who is Maggie Walker. In 1903, she founded the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank that you saw in the photograph. Miss Walker served as the bank's first president, which earned her the recognition of being the first African-American woman to charter a bank in the entire United States. This is important because she was the first, which is always important, especially in the historical context of African-Americans. But let's also talk about why during this time period of her life, it may have been challenging to have this great achievement. So here you'll see a lithograph, a 15th Amendment lithograph, which is basically a print, a colorful print. Maggie Walker was born in Richmond and lived through some pretty important time periods, such as Reconstruction and Jim Crow. After the Civil War, the country went into a period called Reconstruction, which means to rebuild. Virginia had to rebuild physically, but it also had to rebuild politically and socially. So after the Civil War, slavery was illegal, and suddenly Black individuals in the South had more opportunities than ever before. They could go to school, they could own property, they could marry who they wanted, and they could get paid for their work they were no longer considered property like they were during the time period of enslavement. So before I go on, I want to talk about those time periods, specifically Reconstruction and Jim Crow, but also before that. So first, a big historical moment in the United States is the American Civil War, right? So some of you fifth graders and upper grades, like middle school and high school, probably are familiar with the Civil War. It happened between 1861 and 1865. It was fought between the Union and Confederacy, and the central cause was the status of enslaved people, whether to have people enslaved or whether to set them free. In the middle of the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Abraham Lincoln. So this was 1863. It said that all enslaved people in rebellious states should be freed, but this only applied to states that had seceded from the US. Those were the rebellious states that had seceded. And then we get to Reconstruction. So from 1863 to 1877, the US tried to reintegrate states that had seceded and determine the legal status of African Americans. So this is a time period where Maggie Walker lived and was able to have the opportunity to become the first African American woman to charter a bank and be the bank president. In addition, during the period of Reconstruction, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were made. So after Reconstruction comes Jim Crow. This is from about 1877 to 1954, and Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation in the southern US from the end of Reconstruction right up until the Civil Rights Movement. And lastly, a notable point in history as I talk about these historical African Americans is the Civil Rights Movement, which was from about 1954 to about 1968. This was a mass protest movement against racial segregation and discrimination. So moving on, a question to just get your brain going, your mind going. How do you think white individuals who fought for slavery, so to keep slavery, to continue during the Civil War, felt about this period of emancipation and Reconstruction when African Americans were set free and had new opportunities to get married, to own land, and to work for an income, okay? So you're probably thinking, like myself, they were pretty frustrated. They didn't like it. Kind of like we don't like change, we get uncomfortable. They didn't like change. They were used to it, and it worked for them. And so they created a series of laws, which are, again, those Jim Crow laws, which made it harder for Black individuals to use their new opportunities and freedoms. These laws, yes, are called the Jim Crow laws. So as we continue to talk about Maggie Walker, it's important to remember that she grew up in a time of great opportunity because of her success, but also a time of opposition, a trying time, and a time where people were still trying to take those newfound opportunities away. So these are some photographs that represent other things that she did in her community. When she was a teenager, about 14 years old, some of you might be 14 or close to 14 or a little older than 14 like herself, she joined the local council of the Independent Order of St. Luke. So you're going to hear me say that a lot, St. Luke, the Independent Order of St. Luke, which is represented here in this pamphlet. The Fraternal Burial Society was established in 1867 in Baltimore. It administered to the sick and aged, so they helped sick and elderly people and promoted humanitarian causes to encourage individual self-help and integrity. In 1899, she became the executive secretary and treasurer of this fraternal society, the Independent Order of St. Luke. It was at that time a fraternal and cooperative insurance organization in Richmond. So in Baltimore, it was more so helping people, helping the elderly. And in Richmond, it kind of transitioned into an insurance organization. In 1902, Ms. Walker established a newspaper titled the St. Luke Herald to promote closer communication between the order and between the public or the people in her community, to let them know what was happening, what they had to offer, and how they could help one another. In 1903, she founded the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank, which is the bank you saw on one of the first photographs with the pen. Again, she served as its president for 3 decades, so about 30 years. She was dedicated, right, to serve that long. And at her death in 1934, she was at the point of being the chairwoman of the bank. At the top, you see she's also was an activist. She fought for equal treatment of Black people. She arranged boycotts of segregated streetcars. So you can see an example of a streetcar in the left-hand side of the slide. She also fought for women's suffrage and worked with white allies. So she worked with whites who believed the same things she believed, that Black people deserved opportunity and that they deserved to be treated equally. As an adult, she lived and worked in Jackson Ward. And so you can see this placemaker at the bottom left that says Jackson Ward. It gives you a little history about the community. The Jackson Ward is sometimes referred to, and in the past, more so referred to as the Black Wall Street of the South. So some of you may have heard of Wall Street. Jackson Ward was known commonly as the Black Wall Street of the South. It's a neighborhood in Richmond that had many wealthy and prominent Black leaders like Maggie Walker herself. Business people lived there and congregated there, and activists also lived and congregated and worked there.
Hey, Trinity, could you speak up a little bit? One of the classes is just having a little bit of a hard time hearing. Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to turn my mic up a little bit. Sorry about that, guys. And I'll keep this closer to my mouth. All right. The last photograph that on the right-hand side that I didn't discuss is the Maggie Walker National Historic Site, which is actually her original home in Jackson Ward that is now used as a museum. So you can go there and visit and learn more about her. And there's also an elevator in there that's really cool from that time period. All right. So all of the Virginians that we look at today live in similar time periods as Maggie Walker and have connections to the Jackson Ward neighborhood, as I stated in the beginning. In addition to her house being in the Jackson Ward area, our museum, the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, is on the same street. So I could walk there on my lunch break if I wanted to, from her historic site, her home, to my job. Let's go on to our next person that's a lesser known. We're going to focus on Martha Pryor Anderson, who is on the left. She was a poet and dramatic performer. She was born in 1890 and passed in 1993. She was born in Richmond, so she's a fellow Richmonder. We don't know a lot about her, but she seems to fall under the category known as a dramatic performer, which is someone who is like an actor, but someone who additionally performs dramatically and recites speeches, poems, and monologues. So she definitely loved to speak and perform in front of people. She probably didn't have much stage fright or nervousness when she got in front of a large group to do what she loved. Both of her parents, a handyman laborer and a domestic worker, were born as enslaved people. Her parents were deeply religious, so she went to church a lot as a young girl and spent much of her time at Ebenezer Baptist Church, which is a church in Richmond. There, when she attended Sunday school, she showed a flair or a zeal or an excitement for public speaking and performing in front of others. Her flair seems to have developed initially in church. So that's where she first really started honing in on her dramatic performance skills. Photographs like these and other objects in our museum collections can be super exciting. Not photographed or not shown here at the BHMVA, we have a letter showing how Martha Pryor Anderson kept in connection with Virginia people, other historical figures from Virginia, friends, family, people that she networked with, even after she moved to New York in 1937. The letter is from L. Douglas Wilder, who you see in the photograph to the right, written to Martha on June 13th of 1989. And it's on letterhead for the Commonwealth of Virginia, Office of Lieutenant Governor. So Lieutenant Governor was sending her well wishes for her birthday and also thanked her for her support on his gubernatorial campaign. So when he was running for state senate, she was a great supporter for him and probably spoke up for him and supported him during his run. At church, she caught the eye of Maggie Walker, who I talked about first. And Maggie Walker encouraged her to develop her acting skills. By the time Mrs. Anderson was in her early teens, she was already in demand as a performer at Sunday tea recitals all around upper-class, genteel Richmond. She also had a love for the most fashionable clothes, the finer things, right? And in order to pay for them, she dropped out of school after 7th grade and took a job at a commercial laundry in Richmond so that she had enough funds and enough monies to buy the nice clothes and outfits that she liked to wear. She founded the Pryor's Dramatic Players Club in Richmond in the 1930s and later moved to New York, where she started the group anew. In the late 30s and early 40s, she enrolled in courses at Columbia University in New York and at private theatrical schools around the city of New York. She made her debut as a performer at Carnegie Hall in the early 1940s. Because of her success and her experience and her confidence, she traveled extensively, appearing in churches, local schools, and colleges. Her repertoire included some of her own poems and dramatic works. She developed her own wide repertory from William Cullen Bryant's Thanatopsis and Shakespeare to Langston Hughes' Freedom's Plow, which is the excerpt you see in the middle. America, land created in common, dream nourished in common, keep your hand on the plow, hold on. And it continues. The poet mailed, Langston Hughes mailed this to Mrs. Anderson and encouraged her to recite it after they met in the 1950s. She continued to perform throughout her life as she grew older at the Abyssinian Baptist Church, where she was a member, and at other churches in Harlem. She passed, sadly, in 1993, but lived a long life. So she lived to be 103. So imagine all that she has seen. Remember, I talked about Reconstruction, Jim Crow. She had lived through some of those historical time periods that were major. So next, I'm going to talk about another performer, Bill Bojangles Robinson, who was a tap dancer, an actor, and a singer. Bill Bojangles Robinson was born in 1878 and passed in 1949. He is very well known in Richmond as Bill Bojangles Robinson. He was the most famous African-American tap dancer of the 20th century with a new style of tap dancing. He's most known for his roles with Shirley Temple in the 1930s, as you can see on the far left. He, in doing so, broke a lot of color barriers in Hollywood and in headlining Broadway productions. While he sometimes received criticism for playing into minstrel stereotypes, which means a form of American racist entertainment, he did stage integrated events and lobbied for more equal treatment of Black soldiers during World War II. Today, he has his own monument in Richmond, Virginia, on the corner of Lee and Adams in Jackson Ward. So you can see this statue. If you live in Richmond or if you're close by, you can see this statue on the corner of Lee and Jackson, on Lee and Jackson Ward. And then I love the picture in the center. These are some pieces that we have in our collection that are representative of his shoe shine kit. All right. So next, am I sounding okay now, Maggie?
You
Hopefully.
sound fine to me. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Next, we're going to go on to a religious leader, Reverend John Jasper. In the Black community and in Black culture, religion has always played a big role. It offers a sense of community and hope in the face of oppression, especially during his time period, his lifetime. It also became a place for leaders and activists to practice public speaking, right? Just like where Martha Pryor Anderson began her career. So Reverend John Jasper was born in 1812 and passed in 1901. So out of all of the historical African Americans I talk about today, he would have been the oldest remarkable Virginian. He was born the earliest in 1812. John Jasper was a prominent Black preacher who established the 6th Mount Zion Baptist Church in 1867. He was born as an enslaved person in Fluvanna County. He learned to read and write from another enslaved man while working in a Richmond tobacco factory. So around the age of 27, he experienced a conversion in 1839. He started studying the Bible. He was taking his faith and belief more seriously, and he began preaching to other free and enslaved Black people, despite the restrictions on enslaved people gathering or preaching. So during this time period, it was frowned upon for Blacks to gather, for enslaved people to gather. It was also frowned upon for them to learn, right, to read and to write. So he really took this opportunity to bring a group of people together, remember to create this community and to have faith in spite of oppression. He became well known for his dramatic oratorical style. After emancipation, Jasper continued his ministry at 6 Mount Zion, which was originally located on Browns Island here in Richmond before moving to the Jackson Ward area for more space. So his church was growing, his community, his congregation was growing, so we needed more space for them to gather. He became nationally famous for his sermon, The Sun Do Move, in 1878. Which he delivered in cities throughout the eastern United States. 6 Mount Zion became a centerpiece in the Jackson Ward community. It provided a variety of services to those in need, like a lot of churches do today. And Maggie Walker, who we discussed first, actually held programs there. So in the chat, why might there have been restrictions on enslaved people gathering and preaching? I kind of gave it away, but in the chat, you can comment if you desire. Why were there restrictions on enslaved people gathering? And then I'm going to check out the chat too to slow myself down a little bit, see if that's okay. Everything's okay. And then check the Q&A box. Awesome. Okay. So next we have an educator, Virginia Randolph. The Virginia Constitution of 1869 passed during Reconstruction. It established a statewide system of free public schools, giving newly freedmen a symbolic and actual step forward towards social advancement. However, schools were still segregated in most of Virginia. That meant that Blacks and whites students could not go to school together, along with almost every other part of life, like movie theaters, like water fountains, like stores and businesses that were segregated, right? Really excited about talking to you and telling you more about Virginia Randolph, who was an educator, a teacher, and a humanitarian, because I am a former teacher. So before working here at the museum, I taught first and third grade. So super excited, additionally, to talk to some students again and get that interaction. Virginia Randolph lived during the time period of Reconstruction and Jim Crow. She was born of formerly enslaved parents in Richmond. She was a pioneering educator. She was a leader in education. Other teachers looked up to her. She was a community health advocate. She was an organizational leader and a humanitarian. She was educated within the public schools of Richmond and embarked on a career in education that spanned nearly 60 years. So nearly 60 years of her life she spent as an educator in some shape or form. She reportedly began her teaching career in Goochland County in or around 1890 and retired as a supervisor of Black schools in Henrico County in 1949. Her 1894 appointment as a teacher, when she became a teacher of a one-room school for Black children in Henrico County, proved a pivotal moment in her development of new ways to approach and integrate industrial arts into the academic curriculum. Her commitment to her community and education galvanized interracial cooperation in broadening access to educational opportunities and healthcare beyond her region. So like a lot of teachers today, she spent her own money. So shout out to your teachers. They spend their own money sometimes to make your schools and your classrooms more fun, more exciting, and a better place for you all to learn and for them to teach. Her efforts culminated in her selection as the first countywide jeans supervising industrial teacher in the South in 1908. So I'd say that's equal to an honor of being Teacher of the Year or National Teacher of the Year. In this role, she was able to travel weekly to each of the Black schools in Henrico County, and she trained teachers to help build community support. She also trained educators throughout Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia. The Virginia E. Randolph Training School was built and named in her honor in 1915. Sorry, let me slow down. In the far left, you'll see Virginia Randolph pictured with the pearl or beaded necklace. In the center, you'll see a schoolhouse that's similar to the first class that she taught. In addition, on the right-hand side, you'll see what the interior of a schoolhouse would have looked like. This isn't her pictured, but this is a teacher and students learning from their teacher. It's a primary class, so elementary level for the most part. In 1926, she received the William E. Harmon Award for Distinguished Achievement in the Field of Education. So she had a lot of accolades, a lot of awards for doing the great teaching that she was doing and leading that she was doing. And lastly, she garnered international acclaim, so international notoriety, as her methods grew to be used throughout rural areas of the entire American South and the British colonies in Africa. She passed in 1958. And so yes, in the center, you'll see the Mountain Road School. This picture is from the Henrico County School website. So next, we have an architect, which is also super cool. This is Mr. Charles Thaddeus Russell, or Charles T. Russell. He was born in Jackson Ward in 1875 and passed in 1952. He later helped to physically transform the area of Jackson Ward into the Black Wall Street of the South. With his career expertise in his profession, he helped design the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank and help renovate the Six Mount Zion Church, which is where Reverend John Jasper preached. Let's go. So on the left, you'll see the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank, and on the right is the Six Mount Zion Baptist Church. Charles T. Russell is technically the second Black architect in Virginia, but only because he came second in alphabetical order to John A. Langford. He had a focus on giving back to his community and creating visual symbols of prosperity through architecture and physical infrastructure. I'll go back so you can get a better look at his certification as an architect from the Commonwealth of Virginia. And also, all in all, overall, Charles T. Russell is an example of how you can build up the world around you. He used his skills to build up Jackson Ward. All right, and now we're going to talk about some physicians or doctors during these time periods and who have a connection to Jackson Ward. First, we have Sarah Garland Boyd Jones, MD, who is painted in this fabulous picture on the left. Sarah Garland Boyd Jones was born in 1866 in Albemarle County. She passed in 1905. She moved to Richmond and attended school with Maggie Walker, who we talked about earlier, and John Mitchell Jr., who you saw in the very first oil painting. I won't go too much into who John Mitchell Jr. was, but for context, he worked as an editor for the Richmond Planet, which was a Black newspaper that exposed racial injustice. So in their teenage years, as they attended school together, Maggie Walker, John Mitchell Jr., Sarah Garland Boyd Jones, they were already networking and probably maybe had no idea how successful they would be in their future and how pivotal they would be in their community, Jackson Ward, and in the outer community, the Black community in Richmond and Virginia abroad. Sarah Garland Boyd Jones earned her medical degree in the late 1800s, becoming the first African-American woman to pass the Virginia Medical Examining Board's examination. And therefore, she's the first African-American and woman in Virginia to become a licensed physician, which is a super awesome accomplishment. She grew up around Richmond's Black elite and became a teacher upon graduating from Richmond Colored Normal School. She entered Howard University's medical school in 1890 and earned her medical degree 3 years later. She established a successful practice in Richmond. So she had her own medical practice, medical office. She and her husband, who was also a physician, helped create a medical association for Virginia's African-American doctors, and the two of them opened their own small hospital. In 1922, the Sarah G. Jones Memorial Hospital, Medical College and Training School for Nurses, later called the Richmond Community Hospital, was named in her honor. So remember that, Richmond Community Hospital, when I talk about the next physician. Richmond Community Hospital was the first African-American patient care facility in Virginia. It was established in 1907. Richmond Community Hospital, which traces its roots to a facility founded in the early 1900s, played a key role in meeting the health needs of African Americans in Richmond during the era of segregation. The brochure reads in green, exposing the unknown, serving the sick, applying skill and knowledge, mixing and dispensing, hospital pharmacy. And it also depicts Black medical professionals in the photographs. All right, so next we have Dr. Zenobia Gilpin, who was also a physician and followed in the footsteps of Dr. Jones, who we spoke about previously. So in the left, you'll see Dr. Gilpin, and you'll see a microscope of hers that we have in our collection, which is really awesome. And then the Virginia Medical Monthly, a publication of the Medical Society of Virginia. Her birthday is unknown, but it was around the turn of the 20th century, so the very early 1900s or the late 1800s. She lived on Clay Street, which is down the street from the original Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, so very close to the Jackson Ward area as well. Following in Sarah Garland Boyd's footsteps as a Black female doctor in the Jim Crow South, Dr. Zenobia Gilpin faced both sexism and racism, but she still rose to national prominence. So she faced sexism because she was a woman in her field, and that wasn't very common, but also racism because of the color of her skin. After graduating from Howard University Medical School in 1923, she dedicated her career to provide medical services, specializing in women's health, to Richmond's Black communities. So Dr. Sarah Garland Boyd Jones and her husband were general physicians, but Dr. Zenobia focused more so on women's health. In addition to her own practice, she developed a program of health clinics held at Black churches at a time when most city hospitals did not treat Black patients. Her program became a model across the nation. She also spoke out about racial disparities in public health and held leadership positions in civic organizations, including the NAACP and the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. She was head of Richmond Community Hospital Women's Health. All right, so there are some photos of Dr. Gilpin here in the left. You can probably find her easily because she's the only woman. She's standing on a step, right, to kind of make the picture more cohesive because she, I assume, is probably one of the shortest in her class. And then to the right, I believe she's either in a church or in a school helping the students, the younger students, with checkups, and probably teaches them a few things as well about health and nutrition and how to take care of themselves and stay healthy. All right, so we started with a business person, Maggie Walker, and we're going to end with two business people who also have military service under their belts. Here we have William Washington Brown, W.W. Brown, born in 1849 and passing in 1897. W.W. Brown was born in Georgia as an enslaved person. He served in the Union Army during the Civil War. He was additionally a teacher and a minister. He was known to be a great speaker and organizer. So in the center, you'll see another lithograph or print of the USCT, the Union Soldier Colored Troops in Petersburg. In 1876, he moved to Richmond and founded the Grand United Order of True Reformers. So that's what you'll see on the right, the Constitution and bylaws of this fraternal organization. The Grand United Order of True Reformers was sometimes referred to as the Grand Fountain of True Reformers. The organization of men started as a temperance organization and shifted to an insurance organization, becoming the largest Black fraternal society and Black-owned business in the US. So you may think, why were organizations like this necessary, right? By establishing insurance that provided members with sick and death benefits, and by encouraging members to purchase land and engage in practices of temperance and thrift, Brown believed that Blacks in the post-Civil War South could thrive. Brown's enterprising and entrepreneurial mind helped lead the True Reformers in creating and organizing a bank, which became the nation's first chartered Black-owned bank and Black-run financial institution. So in this next slide on the left, you'll see the bank of the True Reformers, and photographed to the right are some pictures of the interior of the bank and some of the bankers and people that worked to keep the bank going, to keep it running smoothly. This bank was a model definitely for Maggie Leaner Walker, who followed in his footsteps and opened and chartered her own bank. Lastly, W.W. Brown was very outspoken against the KKK. And last but not least, we have Madam Wilnette Freeman Chalmers Grayson Scott. So I asked our head curator and docent at work, and because she was married 3 times, she has 3 last names. She is best known, though, for her beauty salons that she operated in Richmond on North First Street in Jackson Ward. She was born in 1901 and passed in 2003. She additionally had salons in Fredericksburg, Virginia Beach, Bowling Green, North Carolina, and Greensboro, North Carolina, where she bore the name or got the professional name of Madam Chalmers. The color coordinations in the beauty culture schools that she ran and the salons were the talk of the town. So I imagine they were very vibrant and funky colors and different patterns in her salons. After Pearl Harbor, Mrs. Scott felt the urgency to make a greater contribution to her country. And so to the right, you'll see a poster picture of the WACS, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. She participated in the Red Cross Motor Corps and then joined WACS in 1942. In her service, she obtained the rank of corporal and became the private chauffeur for Colonel Bosefield. Women's Army Corps, or Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, was a U.S. Army unit created during World War II that enables women to serve in non-combat positions. So this had never happened before for women, with the exception of nurses that took care of the hurt soldiers. But it had never happened before within the ranks of the U.S. Army. With the establishment of WAC, more than 150,000 women served. After her discharge from service, Mrs. Scott relocated to Chicago, where she enrolled in the licensed practical nurse program and received her nursing certificate. So she was in beauty. She was therefore an entrepreneur. She also served in the United States Army. And lastly, she served as a nurse. She did private duty nursing until she was 87 years old. In 1968, Ms. Scott answered Chicago's call for LPN homeowners to provide for the mentally challenged. She experienced great satisfaction in offering this service. In her later years, Ms. Scott returned to Richmond, continued her nursing career, and became active in her Catholic church and in the retirement facility where she resided. So in the center is an advertisement for her beauty school, to attend her beauty school and or get your hair done at the salon. So I think that's our second to last slide. Just wrapping up, these 2 photographs are of Maggie's museum, the Virginia Museum of History and Culture on the left, and then my museum on the right, the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia. If you haven't visited before, you definitely got to plan a visit to come out with your family and friends. And I know I've given you a bunch of information. It definitely took some time for Maggie and I to pick these historical figures. Coincidentally, they all had a connection to Jackson Ward, but that just speaks highly of Jackson Ward and the success that was created and bred there. So I think, Maggie, we can open it up for questions. And
yeah, absolutely. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to, again, put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A. But I did see a couple of questions come through during the program. So our first question is, wasn't tap dancing largely developed by Black dancers? And so I know a little bit about this, not a ton. So I don't know if you know anything about this, Trinity.
I don't know much about that either. I would have to do more research. But that is a great question.
Yeah, so the little bit that I know about it is that tap dancing sort of developed out of like Scots Irish dancing, and then got combined with some of the dancing that enslaved peoples were doing on plantations. And it sort of like combined and fused together into this new style of tap dancing. And we see that also with like food in the South and with music in the South, all of these different influences combining together to create a new product. But Bill Bojangles does create his own style of tap dancing that becomes super popular. So I think it was a little bit of a combo situation happening, but that is the little bit that I know about it. Let's see. And then we have Margaret's class, or someone using Margaret's name, asked us what the KKK is.
So the KKK stands for the Ku Klux Klan. It was a secret society of whites, mostly white men, who did not like people that weren't just like them, that weren't the same race. So they definitely did not like African Americans and people who had different religious beliefs, right? And sometimes executed, did actions and things that were harmful to people of other races, and harmful to people that had different beliefs. So yeah, that's the KKK. And then I also see from Cecilia Blair in the question box, or the class that Cecilia is in, she asked and wondered what Virginia Randolph's methods were. Yes, that's a great question too. I would have to do some additional research. I'm not sure if Maggie knows, but yes, she definitely had, she was doing something amazing. Like I said, she was equal to, if not greater than, a teacher of the year, or a national teacher of the year. So that's definitely something I need to look into, being a former educator myself.
Yeah, I love her methods because she was very like hands-on, like learn through doing, which we also love at a museum because like we have objects and we want to like learn hands-on stuff. So yeah, she was very like skills-based, hands-on, learn through doing, learn skills that could be turned into jobs later. So it was both like learning classroom knowledge, but also learning like weaving and cooking and stuff like that students would actually learn like specific skills that they could take out into the workforce as well.
Yes. Awesome. I see someone asked, where is the Black History Museum? So it is on 122 West Lee Street in Richmond. A little tricky parking, but ultimately it's a great experience, and we'd love to have you come visit and take a tour, or take a self-guided tour.
Yeah, and look at that building. It looks like a castle. It's so cool. So it's a really fun place to visit.
Indeed.
And then my museum, the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, is closed to the public right now because we're doing a bunch of exciting construction work. But we're going to be reopening in May, and we're going to have like a ton of new stuff to see, including some of the Black History Museum stuff. And we're going to have like a big celebration and all of that. So we would love for you guys to come see us. Let's see. How old is the photograph on the bank on the first part of the presentations? I don't know, Trinity, can you scroll back? I'm not sure if I remember which photo. Yes, and Kathleen, I know, I'm so excited. There's funding for like a documentary about Virginia Randolph, and I know she's digging and doing a lot of like primary source research and like learning stuff that we don't know. So I am very excited to watch it and learn more.
I think they're referencing this photograph.
It's early 20th century. I don't know the date off the top of my head, but I could find it. It would be in the record for the photograph.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Well, guys, if there are no other questions, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We were so excited to chat with you.
Yes, thank you guys.
All right. Well, bye. We will see you at some of our other webinars, I hope. Have a great day, everyone.